High tension, U.S. Navy upgrades more ships for the F-35 to fight China in South China Sea. Former Acting Navy Secretary Thomas Modly hadn't been out of the job more than a month before the Navy canceled an ongoing study he launched into the future of aircraft carriers, a review he optimistically termed Future Carrier 2030. Modly and his predecessor, Richard Spencer, had been excited by the prospect of fielding smaller, more risk-worthy carriers that could reduce the chance of China or Russia landing a major punch in a conflict simply by sinking or disabling a single ship, such as in Nimitz, a Ford-class aircraft carrier with thousands of sailors and tens of billions of dollars of hardware aboard. But very soon after Modly's spectacular departure, former Acting Secretary James McPherson canceled the study until further notice. Still, as the effort to move to a smaller carrier seems frozen as it has been for decades every time someone suggested it, the Navy is forging ahead with preparing its big deck boats, the amphibious assault ships, for operating with the Marine Corps F-35B. The Corps' F-35 fighter jet is a short takeoff and vertical landing variant. The Navy recently inked a $200 million contract with BAE Systems to upgrade the amphibious assault ship Boxer to be able to operate with the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the fifth landing helicopter assault ship to be so amended. The USS Boxer dry dock availability will complete a combination of maintenance, modernization, and repair of the following systems: hull structure, propulsion, electrical plant, auxiliary systems, and communications and combat systems, as well as alterations to prepare the ship for operations with the F-35B Joint Strike Fighter. But the idea of smaller carriers is one the Navy has been flirting with more recently. Last fall, the Navy packed 13 F-35Bs on the amphibious assault ship America. The Navy Secretary Spencer later said the ship could hold up to 20 F-35 Bravos on a large-deck amphib. My cost performance there is tremendous. Does it have the same punch? No, it doesn't, but it does have a very interesting sting to it. The Boxer, which is an older class of big-deck amphib, could likely pack about 15 F-35Bs if it were dedicated for the purpose, according to Brian Clark, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. The idea of a lighter carrier is also one that has intrigued Defense Secretary Mark Esper. In an interview with Defense News that coincided with the fiscal 21 budget rollout, Esper raised the possibility that lighter carriers were still on the agenda. The Navy has shied away from lighter carriers for decades because, as expensive as the carriers are, they generate more sorties for less money than it would cost a comparable number of smaller carriers to generate. While the utility of a smaller carrier that still has a mean bite was recently demonstrated when a COVID-19 outbreak on the carrier Theodore Roosevelt sidelined the flat top in Guam in the middle of its deployment. The Navy directed the America to the South China Sea to provide presence there to dissuade China from taking advantage of the Roosevelt's misfortune. The ability of the America to be on scene when the Roosevelt was not was a good thing. Esper not think anyone is going to argue that it replaces a Ford-class carrier, but the idea of a more distributed force is a sensible one. Esper not saying that the Navy should stop building Ford-class carriers, I'm saying they should be including smaller carriers. Esper think there is definitely a strategic reason to do it. It's called the DF-21 and DF-24, and China's ability to fill the sky with missiles over the South China Sea. The Navy gets it, but implementing the idea and turning into tangible programs is the problem. The first step for the Navy is to figure out what it wants to achieve when it comes to countering China, he said. Cropsey's strong opinion is that the issue is compounded by the lack of a strategic concept. What's the plan? What's the objective? Once the Navy is able to articulate that, questions such as the ones being asked about smaller carriers will resolve themselves much more easily. Meanwhile, the Chinese People's Liberation Army on Thursday expelled a U.S. warship that trespassed into Chinese territorial waters off the Xisha Islands in the South China Sea, and the U.S. operation amid the COVID-19 pandemic show the U.S. is the source that sabotages peace and stability in the South China Sea, a Chinese military spokesperson said on Thursday. U.S. provocations like this proved China's increased defense budget is well justified, analysts said. The PLA Southern Theater Command organized naval and aerial forces to follow the U.S. guided missile destroyer USS Boxer when it illegally trespassed into China's territorial waters off the Xisha Islands on Thursday without authorization from the Chinese government. The PLA Southern Theater Command troops followed and monitored its course, identified the ship, warned and expelled it, Lee said. This provocative move, a naked hegemonic navigational action, seriously violated China's sovereignty and security interests and related international law and norms, and seriously sabotaged peace and stability in the South China Sea region, the spokesperson said. This is not the first time the PLA has expelled a U.S. warship from the South China Sea this year. Similar incidents occurred in late January with the littoral combat ship USS Montgomery near the Nansha Islands, in early March with the destroyer USS McCampbell near the Xisha Islands, and in late April with the destroyer USS Barry also near the Xisha Islands. While the U.S. is attempting to make such operations routine, the PLA has showed it is ready and able to stop these U.S. military actions, a Chinese military expert said. In a time when the COVID-19 pandemic is still ravaging the world, the U.S. is disregarding its people's safety and not focusing on domestic epidemic control, nor is it contributing to global pandemic control, but sending warships over a great distance to the South China Sea to show off its strength and cause trouble, spokesperson Lee said. This shows the U.S. hypocritical nature of talking in one way and acting in another, and fully demonstrated that the U.S. military is the source of disaster sabotaging peace and stability in the South China Sea, Lee said. China has indisputable sovereignty over islands in the South China Sea and nearby waters, and Chinese troops are always on high alert and will take any necessary measure to resolutely fulfill their duty, safeguard national sovereignty and security as well as peace and stability in the South China Sea, Lee said. China just announced a 6.6% rise in its defense budget for 2020 on May 22. China takes both its economic situation and national defense demands into account when setting the scale and allocation of its military expenditure, and repeated U.S. military provocations near China and some even into Chinese territory have obviously threatened China's national security, the anonymous expert said. The moderate and steady increase in the nation's defense expenditure is right, proper and necessary, Wu Jin, spokesperson for the PLA People's Armed Police Force delegation to the third session of the 13th National People's Congress. Hegemony and power politics grow from time to time, as some countries are practicing unilateralism, geopolitical risks are rising, and the international security system and order are being challenged, and China's homeland security and overseas interests are also facing some real threats, Wu said, noting that China must have a clear mind when it comes to national defense and be prepared for danger in peacetime.